been some fairly significant developments in tech policy through the year. So as a team, we thought that we'd discuss some of the stories that we did, some of the stories that stood out for us, and maybe share our comments or our views on what we felt shaped the year. For me personally, the biggest story of the year was India's ban on over 200 Chinese apps, particularly because from a geopolitical perspective, this is the first time that a country has actually banned Chinese apps or apps from any other country at that scale. And so, if you think about it, what does this mean for the internet as a whole? When one significant country with over 700 million internet connections is able to ban one of apps from one of the largest in the world. What does that mean for the multinational, the cross-border, the open nature of the internet, and how our country is going to react to China, but also to each other in instances of conflict, because Indian and Chinese troops are are facing off across the line of actual control um, between the two countries. And so it's very clear that technology is geopolitical. We saw that last year in 2019 with India choosing not to sign the DFFT agreement at the G20 summit proposed by Japan, which allowed cross-border data flows. We've seen that this year with the RCEP agreement. And so, the geopolitical nature of the internet is here to stay. Linked to that is the other big issue of antitrust and competition. And I thought the way the Indian founders, many of them old friends of mine, bandied together and pushed back against Google's imposition of a 30% commission on apps on purchases through Indian apps, which is frankly a tax given the nature of Google's scale, was extremely worrying, and it ended up with Google deferring that policy for India by another 6 months, but also the beginning of an antitrust investigation into Google's dominance and potential abuse of dominance in this space. When MediaNama launched, we had a discussion which featured some of the more prominent voices, and one of them was Murugavel Janaki Raman. Back in 2008, it was July 19th, 2008, when we did our first event. And Muruga had spoken, at a discussion about his journey as a startup founder. And Bharat Matrimony and Consuminfo, his company now called matrimony.com, basically has led the pushback against Google in case of the previous CCI case as well. And he led the discussions here as well. So there is a significant challenge for Google going forward. The other big tech company in trouble for quite a bit and was Facebook, when the Wall Street Journal revealed that Anki Das, the head of policy for Facebook in India and Central Asia, had allegedly sort of pushed back against taking down of hate speech on the platform and against the banning of the account of a prominent BJP politician. Now, Anki Das has subsequently resigned, but this issue brought to light the role of platforms, the issues related to safe harbor and intermediary liability. And I think it was one of the most significant things to happen in the year because of what it portends for the internet in India in the future. Because the neutrality of platforms was actually under question. And I personally deposed before two committees. One was the Parliamentary Standing Committee on IT, which was privileged, so I can't talk about it. But also before the Delhi government on peace and harmony, that was looking at Facebook's alleged role in what happened around the Delhi riots, which was live streamed by the Delhi government. So that's available for you on YouTube if you want to check that out. What was a bit of a concern also was this strong push for regulating streaming services. So I watch a lot of Netflix, a lot of Hotstar, a lot of Amazon Prime, and the kind of content that's available, the kind of creative expression that's available for us is far superior to anything that we see on television in India. And if you're going to find that content is going to get censored or it's going to be restricted, and the government is trying to put in a regime where there will be a complaints mechanism. Also, about how this entire setup was happening was very worrying about the IMAI's role in trying to determine what a government policy should be, um, or in determining how streaming services should censor themselves is a very, very significant thing. And we wrote, I done a story on a call that the IMAI has had held, um, with many people pushing back against how it was running the creation of this particular self-regulatory policy. That isn't over and done yet, and I think many of these issues we're going to see flow into the next year. Number five for me was essentially the FDI restriction on news media. I still don't know whether MediaNama itself is impacted by this. We don't have FDI, but I don't know if the government defines us as news and current affairs. But that was also of concern. Um, then there was also the non-personal data, which is bad for business in the country because it will effectively mean the nationalization of 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 business intelligence effectively, right? Competitors could get access to invoice data of individuals if it's not pertaining to a particular person, which is of concern. But also all sorts of other data, like what kind of products are being bought in what parts of the country, which is competitive intelligence. And I hope that policy doesn't go through. That will also be up for discussion next year. And last but not the least, the complete mess and the utter uselessness of Arogya Setu. But that's from me. I'm going to hand it over to the rest of the MediaNama team to maybe share what they thought was big for them, what they worked on. Soumya, how was your year?
Hi. So with I think the two things which I reported extensively on this year were drones and the rising instances of deployments of facial recognition tools almost across the country. So of course, as India went under a complete lockdown in the first part of the year, to keep an eye out on the roads, a number of law enforcement agencies out on the grounds basically relied on drones to kind of fly them over people's heads and to see if lockdown restrictions and lockdown norms were being followed properly. So I think drones really, and 6 years ago drones were like banned in the country. They were legalized 2 years ago, but I think this was the year for drones when they actually came into life, and there was a renewed push from the government side to kind of keep as many drones as possible in the air, and this came from across the board. I mean, you saw surveillance drones being deployed, you saw drones being used on top of critical infrastructure, you saw drones being used for surveying. The survey of India is basically carrying out this huge survey operation where it's basically mapping out every single village in India and then eventually make out property, these land title deeds, and hand those out to people. So drones, in a way, I think, of course, like I mentioned earlier, they really came into their own. And I think one very important trend that I personally noticed while reporting on all this is that while, of course, the government is enabling drone use, it is also sort of putting together the infrastructure around drones to sort of keep them in the air. See, drones are relatively newer. There are a lot of things which the government and, of course, the industry itself isn't very sure of. A few of these things, for instance, I mean, because cars have been running on streets for a very long time, so you have a formalized infrastructure around them. I mean, you have training schools, you have a licensing regime, you have insurances for cars. But for drones, although they have potentially they could potentially throw up a lot of challenges when they're in the air. A lot of these things aren't in place right now. But this year again, I mean, the IRDAI, the insurance regulator, it's set up a committee to kind of bring about a working paper on drone regulation, how drones can be regulated by factoring in all the liabilities and potential mishaps that can go when drones are in the air. We saw a lot of drone training schools. Around 20 of them was set up this year in the country, because none of the pilots in India right now are licensed by the government. And to kind of overcome that, because then you don't really know who even is flying a drone in the air, to kind of overcome that, the government has now set up a lot of drone training schools of course, education and the training itself hasn't started in a number of them. But again, that is something which we have in place again. Drone certification again has been put into place with third party institutions like the QCI right now. The Quality Council of India has been basically put in charge of kind of certifying drones. Tata TQ Cert, I think, has been the first company who's been allowed to start certifying drones. But I think overall, COVID surveillance and drones was largely the theme in the drone sector. Again, of course, issues of privacy and surveillance, and again, absolute opacity around how drones were being used. Because the DGCA, while is very forthcoming, the DGCA and both the Civil Aviation Ministry, while usually is very forthcoming on how drones should be deployed out there, for a lot of these instances when drones are being used by law enforcement agencies and when perhaps they pose the biggest threat of becoming mass surveillance devices, that is when we actually see both the government and also state governments and law enforcement agencies keeping quiet. I mean, we filed a number of RTIs to actually even know when these orders were issued to fly these drones or who issued these orders in the first place. But of course, I mean, we've always sort of knocked on closed doors and haven't really received a response which is worth something to show for. I mean, even though we see the drones flying in the air, the government itself will say that they never flew those drones.
No, but
Facial recognition, yeah.
Soumya, one of the things that I remember during
Hmm.
from the all those videos we saw on Twitter was the fact that
Yeah.
there were drones. They had footage of people sitting on top on rooftops,
Yes.
sitting
Yes.
together, and
Yes.
the drone would there would be an audio message asking people
Hmm.
to keep social distancing, and everyone would scurry out, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
and I think there were also instances that we saw of police officials
Hmm.
putting up videos, or ANI. I think we saw in one instance where
Hmm.
where they had a video put up of a police officer saying that they had deployed drones,
Yeah.
but in RTIs we got nothing. So I'm not sure what's going on
Yeah.
over here.
Exactly.
It's like drones are.
So that's what I mentioned. I mean, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So, alluding to the point that I made earlier, when the government allows drones to be deployed, for instance, for survey purposes, that is when these authorization orders are made completely public. But again, when drones are to be used over, say, like over protesters, or when drones are to be used over farmers who are protesting right now, that is
Yeah.
when we don't even know if permission in the first place was sought from the DGC, or if the police just decided on its own that okay, let's fly a drone and make a show out of it. And again, they fly drones in the air, and drones are very capable devices. I mean, equipped with 1080p or 4K cameras even today, and they can potentially capture a lot of sensitive personal data when they are out on the air, and we don't know what happens to the footage that these drones capture,
And
and where these.
that links directly with facial recognition.
Absolutely. I mean, there is, I mean, again, at this stage, because again, and it again alludes to the fact that there is very little transparency around this subject, but there is a
Yeah.
slight possibility that you can fly drones out in the air, capture people's faces, and then run the same stuff into a facial recognition software to basically see if these people are present at a certain place or not. For instance,
So Soumya,
yeah.
what was significant around facial recognition this year?
Nikhil, right now, the Indian government is basically, the Home Ministry particularly, and one department under it, the National Crime Records Bureau, is basically developing is this national level, huge scale automated facial recognition system. I mean, although the project has been delayed quite a bit, but I mean, it's tipped to be honestly the biggest facial recognition surveillance software from of anywhere in the world. I think in the initial stage itself, it's supposed to be processing like a crore images at one point in time. So I mean,
Wow.
you can imagine the magnanimity of that scale. The biggest issue there is, first of all, that there has, I mean, the NCRB itself has really failed to justify the legal basis on which it can even go forward in putting together such a large scale
Yeah, I
surveillance
mean, we
device. For
don't have
instance,
a
the
facial.
Internet Freedom Foundation actually, yeah,
Yeah, we don't have a facial
exactly.
recognition law, and we don't even have a
Not at all.
privacy law yet. So I think
Exactly, exactly.
for me, the miss of the year has been the fact that we still don't have a privacy law.
Yeah,
After
yeah,
all
yeah,
that's happened over the last 3 years, we still
yeah.
don't have a privacy law.
Absolutely. And also, Nikhil, I would just a slight point, even if the privacy law that we have right now, the draft which we have, which is being deliberated right now by the Joint Parliamentary Committee, if that was to be passed in its current stage, there is very little safeguards when governments actually want to surveil you, because you can just put in blanket exemptions for government surveillance and nothing is going to happen. They are absolutely they can be on a roll and, basically not adhere to any of the provisions in the bill at all. So even if the
So
bill were to,
has anyone filed a court case about the fact that facial recognition software is being deployed without a law in place, or not
Uh,
yet?
a court case hasn't been filed, although the Internet Freedom Foundation did send a legal notice to the National Crime Records Bureau, basically asking the legal basis on which
Hmm.
they went forward with putting together the AFRS. And then the NCRB said that, okay, fine, a system similar to the AFRS was envisioned in a cabinet note of 2009. I mean, this was way before the privacy judgments at Twitter. So, I mean, of course,
So
in
that's
the
not
last
necessarily a
more than
legal
over.
basis. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean, just a cabinet note of what happened during a cabinet meeting.
No.
And that has somehow been made to be the legal basis of putting together such a large scale surveillance device. And also, another problem, the one good thing that happened with AFRS is that now the AFRS is not supposed to connect to the strings of CCTV cameras that Indian streets are laden with right now.
Hmm.
So that's one good thing that's happened. But again, the NCRB, it kinds of gives you information in droplets. Like when you go to them, it'll give you information in droplets. And for instance, in the tender document itself, it didn't tell you that, okay, fine, this software is also supposed to be looking if you're wearing a face mask or not, or if you're wearing a face mask, then the software should still work.
Hmm.
This particular provision was never even mentioned in the tender document. But when slyly some company, some a Delhi based company asked the NCRB if this should also be done, they said that yes, that is one of the parameters all of a sudden of the AFRS. And this came out of really nowhere. No one is expecting of something of this sort to happen. Also, Nikhil,
So,
one
so, so,
important thing.
so you
Yeah.
reported on the question and answers that happened
Yes.
around FRS, right?
Yes.
I don't think
Yes.
anyone
Yes.
else got that stuff. No one else reported on that.
I mean, we were the first ones to report on that.
Huh.
After that, eventually, a lot of people picked it up.
Okay.
But yeah, we were the first to kind of spot it. One very important thing, Nikhil, is that just with respect to facial recognition in particular, is just the idea of tech determinism in policing. I reported on this case last month where in Tamil Nadu, a person was caught using a facial recognition software. After, in the night, he was caught and they apprehended him, and they kind of fed his facial data into a software, the face tagger software. And then they caught him because he was booked for previous whatever thefts and robberies, etc. But again, just the general idea of, if I'm a police officer out on the ground at 12 a.m. in the night, and if I'm stopping someone, why am I stopping someone? I mean, what is my hunch? What is the basis on which I stop someone? I think that intuition that the police relies on, and just the general the biases that are ever present in our policing system inherently, I think systems like facial recognition software, they only compound those biases, because of course those systems have their own biases. And when you already give them into an enabler like the Indian policing system, I think the problem is just compounded to another level, and you can't even think. For instance, I mean, if for instance the app comes out with an incorrect match and tells the police officer that I indeed am a criminal, there is nothing of, like, they won't really carry out a forensic test of that facial recognition. If the app is telling them you're a criminal, they will blindly believe the app. There is really nothing in between that happens
No, but
for you to
also
make a case for yourself.
also this random stopping of people has been going on
Yes,
for over a year now,
absolutely,
and I think
absolutely.
we've seen instances of police officials, on at least I've seen on Twitter, of police departments, and I think Soumya had reported on some of them just stopping people and using a tablet or a phone to scan their
Yes,
faces. And
yes,
there is no probable cause standard in India. I think that's one of the things that we have to worry about.
yeah.
Um, Thanks, Soumya. Arun, how's your year been?
Thanks, Nikhil. So, one of the biggest themes that we have been following over the last year, as you know, is the censorship of OTT platforms, their regulation, so to speak. And it has been interesting to see that from absolutely no dialogue whatsoever on the topic, we have suddenly gone to having two drafts of industry-wide self-regulation and talks with the government, and really huge amount of activity around this space, which is basically 4 years old. So
Hmm.
with the entry of by the time Netflix entered, mobile data rates had just started plummeting, and now we have this general recognition of the power of OTT platforms. There is this whole argument that, oh, it's a pull platform, not a push platform. People have to go seek out the content, so it's not like television. But you can kind of still get a sense from all the dialogue that's going on that the government is still anxious that
Yeah.
this is a kind of platform that will reach the masses,
Hmm.
and so they want to control what kind of content goes on there. I haven't really.
So I remember, Arun, I think maybe it was this year or last year.
Yeah.
When John Oliver was, just before John Oliver was doing that show about censorship on streaming platforms and the fact that his own show was censored, the team from last week tonight had gotten in touch with us at MediaNama because I guess ours was the primary coverage of this issue in the country. But have you seen censorship increase this year? Have you seen it decrease this year? Is there more self censorship now than there was before?
Oh, absolutely. There is definitely more self-censorship now. So what usually happens in a lot of streaming services is they have an in-house team that vets content. So for example, last week tonight launches a day later after the US in India. YouTube has the entire episode like minutes after it finishes broadcasting, but Hotstar gets it a day later. I used to wonder why that was, and I think we found out with all the censorship that gets added in those 24 hours what the real reason is.
Yeah, so they would zoom in on John Oliver's.
Absolutely, yeah. And to Hotstar's credit, after John Oliver called them out on it, they just silently stopped doing it. But then immediately after, a couple episodes later, when they showed an Indian map, they did the whole zooming in thing again. I mean, the overall picture across streaming services is that the incidents keep increasing, the reported incidents keep increasing, and that's probably a partial share of what's going on. We have online OTT self-regulation / regulation reading list on MediaNama, and that's a full guide, and it kind of lists how starting from 2016 to now you have many more incidents, and a lot of these newer incidents over the last couple of years, Nikhil, they have been the outcome of pressure campaigns on social media that appear orchestrated somehow and are targeted around very random details in content. For example, a suitable boy, you had a kiss in front of a scene where there was a temple in the background, and that happened maybe a couple of weeks after the show released, and it was so orchestrated. Obviously, no censorship came out of that, but there have been other instances where
you mean it seemed orchestrated? We can't say for sure whether it's orchestrated.
Exactly. I mean, we can't. I mean, we can infer a little bit. Hope we have that kind of insight into what goes on in these companies, because a lot of it is not guided by the law, right? It's all guided by these
emotions.
Yeah, by emotions, by anticipation of what emotions might arise, and everyone acts in different ways. This is something that the self-regulation code is kind of important to note as a backdrop, is that Netflix does this stuff differently, Hotstar does this stuff differently, Amazon Prime Video does this stuff differently.
So what was kind of amazing for me about the way the self-regulation thing was being rolled out was the fact that initially you had a code which had been agreed upon by I think 9 parties a year or so ago, and then out of the blue a new code came out, and that had only 4 signatories initially, and then 5 one more came on board within a day. But out of the 9, 4 people, and significant folks actually, including Netflix, had decided to opt out. And the more we looked into it, the more it appeared to us that this was being pushed out without any kind of a consensus. And in some instances, and that's what some of the folks who some of the streaming services actually came on record and told us that it was being rolled out without their consent and without even consultation. Like someone told us that on the code was initially spoken about on a Friday. They got a draft copy of the code on Monday, and a press conference was done announcing the code on Wednesday. And so they had no time to apply their mind and actually approve it. So this was almost like a fait accompli that an internet association called the IMAI seemed to be trying to push through. And to their credit, the governing board of the IMAI pushed back against it and said that they need to get consensus, otherwise it can't be an IMAI code. And to his credit, Tarun Katyal, who was the head of the entertainment committee, and he took over sometime mid-year, has gone out and publicly said that this is the code that everyone's agreed to. It's our self-regulatory code, and we'll try and do more around it. But this is the code that we are supporting because it has 13 entities that have signed it. But all said and done, it just seems like the regime for censorship of streaming services is here to stay, which is unfortunate. What else was significant this year, Arun? What about the telecom space?
So in the telecom space, this is something a little bit understated. Of course, with COVID-19, we had a huge explosion in traffic. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we had a lot of movement on the net neutrality front this year. That kind of went uh, understated. So we had a large consultation with TRAI, something they had to do virtually starting in around April. And there we actually got into the nitty-gritties of how individual violations of net neutrality will be governed, and what the committees that the committee that will adjudicate on these things will look like, or consult on these things look like, and what the DOT's role will be. And this is the kind of system that I think no developed country that has gone through these motions of net neutrality has ever experienced. So it is going to be very interesting over the next year to track how that space evolves, because everything is fresh ground. When we are talking about classifying, traffic management practices, which is how telcos manage data, how ISPs manage data, and might discriminate against some parts of your internet access. I think that is going to be very interesting to see, because in other countries they've said, okay, you know what, don't do this on residential internet under these conditions. You can do it if this is happening. And there's a lot of asterisks, and there's a lot of exceptions. Here we have a very bright red line that I think we owe credit to the huge amount of activism that has happened around net neutrality over the last few years. And we are going to be, I think, a global case study on detailed implementation of net neutrality, because this is going to be something that net neutrality is currently something that most markets in the world, even developed markets, are not 100% on board with. You either have music apps that are music or streaming apps that are exempted from your data tariffs, and India has basically dirt cheap data tariffs, so that never came into the picture in the first place. And we are really going to see what it's like, at least from a market perspective, what an open internet will feel like. I say market perspective because we still have censorship and shutdowns on the internet, but the market of products and services, the startup ecosystem, which really spearheaded the battle for net neutrality in many places, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
And Arun, you also drafted two actually both of us spoke at the net neutrality consultation, but you also drafted the submission, MediaNama submission on growing broadband in India. A couple of key points that you made over there. What were your thoughts?
So the biggest key point in our submission to the TRAI on proliferation of broadband is that the limits, the kind of definition of broadband, which is still at 512 kbps, has to go.
Yeah.
There is really no justification for keeping it at that level. One or two telcos might have argued in that consultation that there is really no need to change it. I think that
I just want to remind everyone that, and this probably shows my age, but way back when I started reporting on this space in 2006, I think in 2007, Dayanidhi Maran had said that they would keep, I think, 1 or 2 Mbps as broadband way back then. And for us, it's still 512 kbps.
Exactly. And the market, to some extent, at least for the wired broadband space, has paced leaps and bounds ahead of that. And there is really no reason it should stay there. That's one thing. And secondly, there has to be a huge coordinated push towards wired broadband adoption, whether it is through public Wi-Fi hotspots or through residential Wi-Fi adoption.
And that's kind of to their credit. The PMO the cabinet has already signed off on WANI, right, which is the public broadband Wi-Fi project.
Absolutely.
I mean, one thing that I would like to see in that space is opening up TV white space spectrum for access. But also, I guess we didn't put this in our submission, but in more interesting, like in some interesting business models, like how about a non-profit telco, or how about giving a push to community internet networks, because community internet networks have been rolled out in different parts of the world. In fact, along with the Cyber BRICS and the Net Neutrality Coalition, um, uh, uh, MediaNama worked on for the Internet Governance Forum a report with a compilation of articles on openness during internet openness during COVID-19, where we looked at access issues and experiences of different countries. Like in some countries, the regulator actually sanctioned more free spectrum because of increased demand. So regulators learn from some of these global practices that are taking shape. Trisha, how was your year? Yeah, you're on mute, Trisha. You're on mute. Okay, we'll come back to Trisha. Aditya?
Hi, Nikhil. So, yeah, it's been just like 4 months since I joined MediaNama, but it's been a crazy year already. And so, yeah, one of the few things that I think I covered and followed very closely was, like you said, the Facebook debate about political bias and content moderation. So, again, just to recap, basically, Facebook's policy team was accused of favoring a political party, the ruling political party, as the policy team had uh, argued against taking any action because it would hurt their business interests. And what that eventually led to is this huge political debate that 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 is basically like there is a higher there is a huge demand for regulation of internet platforms. And I think, and this is my approach right now, I think 2021 will be extremely key in how platform regulation, I think there will be some amount of political consensus. There will be a lot more political parties that will get onto this bandwagon of asking for intermediary liability to be,
Yeah, but, and that's a policy that's already in the works, Aditya, in the sense.
yeah, indeed. Like the intermediate guidelines have been on the back burner, I think, since 2018, and
It's on the back burner because of COVID, because the Supreme Court
I
hasn't
know,
had time
yeah,
to hear the case.
I know, yeah. So I think, yeah, 2021 will be that year where we will see a lot more discussion on this, and we're already seeing how the Delhi government's peace and harmony committee that you had deposed in the past, in August, I believe. Sorry, it was in September. This was perhaps the first time that the general public was ever treated to an actual committee hearing on something as technical as this. And
Yeah,
it's
so Aditya, funny story. I didn't know that this was going to be public and live streamed until I reached there, and then it went live. So sorry, but carry on.
Yeah, but to their credit, I think we have to acknowledge that these things should be out in the open, and the Delhi government has actually set precedent here.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, also the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information Technology also held hearings on this, and it is still doing that. It remains to be seen what the result of those that will be, and also
But Vinay, just to add to that, for me, I think the most important discussions and debates that happen in this country are in the Supreme Court.
Indeed, I was just coming to there.
Yeah, and I think the Supreme Court hearings should be made public.
Indeed. Yeah, so again, like as you said, the Supreme Court right now is hearing Ajit Mohan's, the head of Facebook India's case, where he was asked to depose in front of the Delhi government's Peace and Harmony Committee, the Delhi Assembly's Peace and Harmony Committee, and Mr. Mohan obviously refused. And his challenge in the Supreme Court will perhaps, I think, set precedents in how state governments will handle platforms. Because essentially Mr. Mohan has used the quasi-federal nature of the Indian Constitution to say that he will only depose in front of the Parliament, the Parliamentary Committee. So I think the eventual and the result of that case again will set precedent in how states can or if they will handle online platforms, and how, because as is well known, internet platforms are ubiquitous, and they have a huge impact on our daily lives. So I think that
by that logic, they can also say that they are governed by the US, so therefore They don't need
Indeed,
to
yeah, yeah. This also figures into the larger demand for dilution of intermediate liability. Right now, we know this for a fact that the incoming president Biden as well as the current one Trump, they've both argued for dilution of Section 230 protections for internet platforms. Although their reason for that are not exactly the same, but both political parties in that country, the US, where most of our platforms are from anyway, there is a lot of consensus in terms of asking for dilution of Section 230. And I think something we should perhaps focus a lot more on in the future is how the changes in US law and US regulation will affect us, because obviously.
I think, Aditya, we should probably do a discussion on intermediate liability next year. We didn't do any this year, but last year we did two. When we were having physical discussions, a fantastic discussion in Delhi, where I think I remember particularly, on the safe harbor provision, there was a discussion on traceability, and I think I remember someone saying that it should be on a best efforts basis. I thought that was a great takeaway for me, that you can't dictate technology, and that's one of the things being debated on IL in the Supreme Court. And then in the discussion in Bangalore, I think there was a very strong push, I remember, for accountability, saying that if it's happening on your platform, it's happening before your eyes. You can't say that you don't have any responsibility over here. And there's a gap between the responsibility and accountability of platforms, which clearly needs to be looked into. So hopefully we'll do something on IL next year. But also, I mean, going back to what Arun had spoken about, we did two fantastic discussions on content regulation as well last year. None this year, but I think we'll probably be doing something again, because this entire streaming service regulation issue, seems to be coming to a head as well.
Yeah. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about where I'm currently in. I am in Telangana right now, and I've covered, since I've joined MediaNama, I've actually covered how there has been, pointing back towards what Soumya had introduced earlier in this discussion, there is a huge push for facial recognition all over the country. And I see that specifically in Telangana. For instance, just around a month ago, the state election the commission, in cooperation with the state government, had tried to introduce an e-voting system for voters who would cast their ballots in the Greater Hyderabad elections, the main municipal elections in the state. The e-voting system, as we had found out, as we had reported exclusively, but also had initially envisioned the link of a facial recognition software that the Telangana government uses for multiple reasons into the e-voting system. However, for logistical reasons more than anything, because there wasn't a lot of criticism, because it never got to that stage, because of logistical reasons, the State Election Commission had to drop the plan. But it seems like that is something that is inevitable, that seems imminent. And Telangana might again be the first place in the country where facial recognition is used in elections. So there are a few elections, municipal elections planned next year, sometime mid 2021. And it is likely that this system might again be discussed sometime at that time as well. So that is something we should also look forward to seeing.
Well, for me, Telangana is kind of like a leading indicator.
Indeed, yeah.
The mess that happens in Telangana gets replicated in other parts of the country. In terms of technology.
Absolutely. As in, like, yeah, facial recognition right now is available to the general public. It has been for a while for
it's available to the
citizens.
police as well. That's the thing.
Yeah, that it has been, like Soumya had said earlier, the Telangana State Police does have access to facial recognition. But to point out to the ubiquitous nature of the software, pensioners in Telangana who are seeking payments, the welfare payments from the state government, from Asra pensions, believe they can identify themselves using a facial recognition software through an app that is developed and hosted by the on Play Store by the Telangana government. Since the pandemic began, the facial recognition push has actually, there has been a push for facial recognition. It has since been deployed in degree admissions, as in children who are seeking admission in degree colleges across the state. Their counseling can be facilitated using facial recognition. Facial recognition software. Of course, this does not answer any of the questions of personal data, and because we still, as we had earlier noted, we still don't have a law for personal data. So we still, those questions are still unanswered. Also, one more thing that they've done is the road transport authority services. You can get a license renewed, and you can do that from the comfort of your home by using that app and just using the facial recognition module and basically telling the government that yes, you are alive. So yeah, so there has been a genuine push towards facial recognition. I think we're going to see more of that, and we're
There
going
was-
to
Yeah,
see that
there was
I
across.
just
also
wanted to
this-
say that I'm not against facial recognition. I don't think we are going to be Neanderthals and oppose technology for that sake. But I would still say that my problem largely is when technology is rolled out without adequate human rights safeguards, without adequate protections being put in. And I sure as hell don't see why or how, both in case of facial recognition and in case of drones, or even in case of all the health ID systems that I'm sure Trisha is going to talk about, you're rolling all of this out without checks and balances in place.
Yeah.
We need protections first. Sorry,
Yeah,
Soumya, you
absolutely.
were saying something, Soumya.
I just had a little point to add to, I mean, of course, the exhaustive list that Aditya just mentioned about. So there was also this one project that the Telangana government carried out, I think, in partnership with Larsen and Toubro, where I think it was perhaps also the first stage to do that, where they had these cameras out on the road, and these cameras were basically to detect whether a person was wearing a mask or not, and then to eventually kind of challan them there. So again, an outlier perhaps, and definitely Telangana. And facial recognition in Telangana, I think it's one of those testing and breeding grounds for the tech. And of course, eventually, I mean, I also reported on this thing where the Noida authority has come out with a tender to basically inundate the Noida streets with CCTV cameras, also capable of facial recognition, matching, and all of that. So you see these things now getting very close to you day by day, and you don't even know how this is actually going to affect you. I mean, of course, coming from a place of privilege, maybe you would be okay, but again, I think a lot of people are at risk unless, as Nikhil mentioned, we have adequate safeguards in
like
place.
as you say, I forgot to add a little bit about CCTV. Currently, the Telangana government wants to make Hyderabad, wants Hyderabad to have, I think, 10 lakh CCTVs in the foreseeable future, sometime in the foreseeable future. Right now, it has, I believe, 5 lakh, 5 lakh, but the working ones are much fewer. But that being, even right now, I think Hyderabad is the most surveilled city in the country, and one of the most surveilled.
I think it's one of the most surveilled cities in
Indeed,
the entire world. In fact, yeah.
Yeah, and to add on to that, there is the
And they're
Telangana
proud
state.
of it.
Absolutely, they don't
very
shy away
proud
from
of
that
it.
fact.
Yeah, and
also, I remember doing a story. This was, of course, Aditya, before you joined MediaNama. I remember doing a story, and this was again before the 10 lakh target was basically put out there, where the chief minister himself said that every inch of the state would be under CCTV surveillance, and again the gigantic control center that they're coming out with in Hyderabad. So everything is going to be monitored in the state.
That
so it's
command
it's an
control.
example, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other Indian states with similar tendencies are going to jump onto that bandwagon.
That command control center is actually going to get. I think it's going to be launched, I think, sometime in the early part of 2021. So again, that's also going to happen.
Well, one command and control surveillance center that we haven't seen yet is NatGrid, which was supposed to be launched this year in December, and before that last year in December, and before that the year before in December. So thankfully it's forever delayed. Maybe by the time it gets readied and rolls out, it'll be too outdated, or then maybe not necessary. But yeah, that's one major one. Trisha,
Hi, Nikhil. Am I audible?
we can hear you this time.
Great. Okay, so I think the first interesting thing to happen was just a week after everything changed. So the prime minister came on TV and he said, "Hey, we're going into lockdown, and you should talk to your doctor on the phone. Whatever you want from him, whatever consultation you want, talk to him on the phone. Don't go and meet him." And that was essentially him saying that carry out telemedicine when when there were no guidelines for it, when it has been had been in a gray area for as long as you can remember. And a week after his speech, the health ministry released the telemedicine practice guidelines, and voila, now everyone could carry out telemedicine legally. So that was a major turning point in digital health, where something that was outlawed even in Karnataka by the medical associations over there now could be practiced all over the country. That was something that was inevitable, but again, it was left to a point where you absolutely needed to bring out guidelines, where it needed a pandemic for you to say that, okay, now you can carry out telemedicine.
Yeah, but
Um,
we've seen in that sense that there are moments in time which change the future of a particular industry. It
yeah, like
happened.
2611 was when, right? 2 months after 2611, I think they amended the IT Act.
Yeah, no. So it was, it was after the attacks in Mumbai, the 26/11,
Yeah.
that they amended the IT Act. But I was referring more to demonetization and what it did to payments. And I think the pandemic has done something similar for e-commerce deliveries, as well as the health ecosystem. But what else has been happening around health?
Well, I think just a couple of weeks into the lockdown, an entire activity started behind the scenes on developing something called the health stack, which has been called the health blueprint and the health roadmap and various things over the past years. Because the first iteration of it was, a paper released by the Niti Aayog back in 2018. But this time, it's just taken them 2-3 months to put out something called the National Digital Health Mission, where they're saying, where one of the components is going to be that you're going to automate consent, so that interacting with doctors and doctors' interactions with patients on a mass scale all become digitized. So, and you store records online, and you interact, you pass consent back and forth between, not just between doctors and patients, but also between health apps and health services. All of it is done online. We covered a couple of stories where we saw iSpirit doing workshops along with the Swasth Alliance, giving demos of how these projects would work, and eventually a lot of this literature of consent authentication and management and so on eventually became a part of the digital health mission, which the health ministry released, and now the National Health Authority is implementing. This has already started rolling out in six union territories, and there have been reports. The Caravan has reported on this about how, although that whole language of voluntary was incorporated into the mission documents, it is to some extent it is being posed as a mandatory service, and auxiliary nurse midwives, which are like the ground level healthcare workers in Chandigarh, some of them are being asked to encourage people to register for health IDs. A couple of messages from the health departments in Chandigarh went out recently to, a couple of residents in Chandigarh in a certain area that, hey, go here and register for the health ID, and uh, the link where you could register was given, and it said that this is required for streamline of delivery of COVID vaccines. So it's all come to a head very, very quickly, and it's all been in lockstep with what has happened with Arogya Setu. And there was indication in the beginning that although Arogya Setu was put out as an app for contact tracing, and the success of it is obviously still completely in question. It was gradually, as it picked up, there was indication, and people from Niti Aayog clearly stated that this will be a part of the health stack and it will be a part of Ayushman Bharat. So, so
Yeah, it's
that's
almost
where
like
we
that was
are
a
with
fait
health
accompli, right?
ID.
They'd already decided that it was going to be a means to an
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. So it will be interesting in the coming year because vaccines have started rolling out in a couple of countries. India is expected to get vaccines in for Q1 next year.
Hmm.
And health workers are likely to be among the first group of people to get it. And
But Tisha, can you just run us through what are the various documents that were released and what each, like what's the purpose of one, right? So there was some consultation previously. There was a Disha bill that was once talked about. There was the National Health Blueprint, the consultation that happened. What are like how's one different? Like what is the purpose of each of them?
so the first one, the Disha Act was old, and as soon as was in 2017 originally, and as soon as the Personal Data Protection Bill started being drafted and the committee assembled, and the first draft was released, it became clear that that bill has been scrapped
Hmm.
because the BDP bill will anyway subsume any similar laws and draft laws such as Disha. So Disha is out of the picture. The second thing that came in was the National Health Stack paper by the Niti Aayog in 2018. That was vague. It defined a stack structure in which you would have a couple of layers, and it was whole India stack literature that was there.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I remember
that
what was
had
funny was that when
Nikhil, I'm
uh,
sorry, I didn't catch that.
so I said what was funny was when a researcher gave us some RTIs that he had filed in the responses he'd
I'm
gotten.
sorry, I can't. Am I audible?
You're audible. Am I audible? Okay. What? Okay, Tesha, you go
Sorry.
ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just stopped hearing you there for a second. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so then there was a health stack in 2018. There was consultation on that. That then evolved to become the National Digital Health Blueprint, in which there wasn't much activity until the mission that happened after the pandemic. So the mission has been the most comprehensive document yet, which also has some of the technical aspects, like I said, about consent, exchange, and authentication, and so on. And along with that, they also released a health data management policy, which has now been finalized. So that essentially acts as um, it borrows the basic concepts over there has been borrowed from the personal data protection bill, and from what it appears,
Hmm.
it will be in sync with the bill. And of course, it has some provisions like, oh, you can use your Aadhaar to sign up for the health ID,
Of
which, by
course.
the way, yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I think in the coming year it'll be interesting to see, if getting a vaccination or registering for a vaccine will be linked to getting a health ID, and how much of it will be the threat that if you don't register for it, you won't get it. And because if you do that, it's still not mandatory, but the threat is enough, right? So, yeah, so let's see what happens.
So, what else outside of health, Tisha? Anything
I
interesting
think,
that you spotted during the year that caught your interest?
yes, of course. I think, again, this year there were multiple cases around gambling and gam- gambling services, online gambling services, including fantasy gaming services. So again, a couple of cases came to the court, and just this year, Andhra Pradesh banned online gambling. A couple of months after that, in complete reaction to a court case, the Tamil Nadu government went ahead and banned it with an ordinance. And interestingly,
So gaming is just another name for gambling, right? Are they the
right,
same?
and no, they're not the same. The gambling companies, of course, and there's a whole argument about like whether they should be called gambling and so on, because the legal differentiation over there is that if it's skill based, it's not gambling, and if it's based on chance, then it's gambling.
Hmm.
So if you're putting that legal differentiation aside and calling it gambling, a lot of these services insist on being called gaming. Like, tell me, there have each time I do a story on, say, Dream 11 or Mobile Premier League, I get a call from the PR team. They say that you called us a sports fantasy sports platform. No, we are a gaming platform. So they're very careful about don't call us fantasy sports, call us fantasy gaming and so on. So
Yeah, just a note to PR agencies, we don't really listen to you guys, so don't call about these things. You know.
right. So something interesting that happened was so there was a case in the Rajasthan High Court and against a service of against Stream 11, sorry, and these guys said that so there's enough legal precedent for Dream 11 to be completely safe in a legal sense, right? Because the Punjab and Haryana High Court back 2-3 years back they said that you're okay, you're skill based, and then that was okayed by the Supreme Court as well. So so that case came to the Rajasthan High Court, and then Dream 11 in their submission they went into this whole detail about how they are self-regulated by something called FIFS, Federation of Indian Fantasy Sports, and the Rajasthan government went ahead and actually said that these guys are self-regulated, they don't need to be touched. So I think that's very interesting because that's basically a court acknowledging a self-regulatory body that the government has not acknowledged yet. So yeah.
Well,
And
well, just related, now that you mentioned FIFS, the other thing I remember was how that entire fracas that happened between Paytm and Google, because Paytm has a service called Paytm First Games.
yeah.
And so at around the time that the Indian Premier League, which is India's primary T20 cricket uh, tournament, but that around the time it was beginning, a bunch of different apps and services started offering cashbacks based on performance um, of various teams or the performance of players, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So Google doesn't allow real money gaming, as it is called, doesn't allow these apps in India, and it doesn't allow them in many parts of the world. Although in some parts of the world they are allowed. And so Google went ahead and pulled. So Paytm First Games, I believe, was basically doing real money gaming, and then uh, uh, I think something that Paytm on its own app was doing to enable the download of Paytm First Games, and since Google doesn't allow real money gaming, it was what you can't do directly, you can't do indirectly either. So Google pulled the Paytm app off, which created a huge issue, and perhaps precipitated a few weeks later into the whole 30% antitrust kind of situation. But at the same time, I believe bunch of other sites were also bunch of other apps were sent warnings about enabling downloads of real money gaming apps, um, which again is an indication of Google's power, but also the regulatory uncertainty around real money gaming, because some of these are allowed in some parts of the country, and then various states have banned these apps as well. So how does this work on the internet? Like, how do you enforce jurisdiction on the internet is a perennial internet problem. So the two key tech policy issues or two key tech problems when it comes to law are: number one, enforcement of jurisdiction, and number two is the enforcement of is the attribution. So we'd done an interview with Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, who said to us that the attack on Kudankulam was not deemed to be a cyber attack, even though we believe it was malware. Um, so attribution, obviously, he talked about in that interview, was that it's a major problem online. But on the jurisdiction front, very interestingly, uh, on the UN website at the open-ended working group, which is looking at cyber stability and cyber issues, including sovereignty. Um, India in its submission, or there was a submission uploaded by them from India, which said that the sovereignty of data needs to be with the country that the individual belongs to, um, no matter where. So sovereignty needs to extend to data. So the governance of data of an individual should be with the country that person is a citizen of, rather than where that data is stored, and that plays in with the data localization debates that we're having in India. But funnily enough, like 3 days after that submission was put up by the Indian government by the UN, it was pulled down. So I don't know what exactly happened there. Uh, but go ahead, Tisha. Anything interesting? Any other thing that you noticed?
I think with gaming slash gambling will just be because the Niti Aayog has jumped into the fray, and they've put out a policy saying that just leave them alone and let them self-regulate, and as long as they stay within their legal limits, we should be fine, and so on. And interestingly, they've also said that the uh, the self-regulatory organization that will eventually look at the fantasy gaming and so on, they should approach state governments which look at games of skill unfavorably. So now, I mean, that can get complicated because these are all colonial era laws, and once these states woke up to online gambling instead of just gambling, and they didn't really, many of these didn't really think through what they should ban, what they should leave alone. And now I don't know how it would work. A self-regulatory organization being asked to harmonize, asking some state governments to harmonize laws. I
Well, I
don't.
mean, you have a self-regulatory organization trying to create India's OTT streaming policy. So funny things happen. Advait,
Hi, Nikhil. I guess this year is the year of the pandemic, but it's also the year fintech in India
I thought
finally
that was
found.
2016.
No, no. I think this is the year that whatever effort you put in from 2016 onwards paid off this year. I think all the top, if you just look at the payments companies, at least all the top payment companies have reported higher revenues this year. They have reported a growth in the user base from both consumers and merchants. They've also got more funding. So we've seen more companies turn unicorn this year, fintech companies. So this includes Razorpay, PhonePay, and even Pine Labs, which was earlier this year in January.
Yeah,
So
but
I
this is
think,
Advait, this has also been the year that the business model was taken out, right? For lots of
correct. I was
countries,
just
net
getting to
zero
that. So
MDR.
sorry, I was just getting to that. So as demonetization pushed people to use digital payments, COVID has induced people to use digital payment apps more. And the app companies have figured this out that instead of just offering you the simple transfer money from one wallet to another or from one bank account to another through UPI, I have to add more and more services for you so that I get my fee income. Because essentially, without zero MDR, which came in from the 1st of January onwards this year,
Hmm.
you have no revenue model there. So how do you make money? The idea is to make the way to make money is to cross sell other services. So you see all the top payment apps at least uh, enter the mutual fund industry, enter the insurance industry essentially as a sales agent model. And now a lot of them have also launched credit card services and loan services. So credit cards to the consumer, virtual credit cards to the consumer, and working capital loans for their merchants based on all
Hmm.
the underwriting data that they get. So if let's say one customer or one merchant, about 60 to 70% of their business revenue is coming through the app or through a digital mode, that can be tracked and that can be underwritten for a loan. So we're seeing a lot of consolidation of products in itself. So it's moved from pure financial services. I am just a payments player, I'm just providing a payment solution, to now business solution. So you're getting into ledger management, you're getting into inventory management, you're getting into delivery, you're getting into discovery. So I mean, each app has their own contours to this journey. But I think clearly what the idea is that you're trying to capture as much as your consumer or your merchants needs as much as possible within one app. So it's sort of the super app phenomenon has started already in India, and it actually begun from April, June onwards, and that's only taken off now because now you're seeing traction where people are actually buying these cross-sold services from these companies. But this and while this is on the payment side, the digital banking side has also seen great traction. I think some of the top private sector banks and State Bank of India, for instance, are now sourcing a lot more of their business, upwards of 80% of fresh deposits or fresh loans from their digital channels. So all that sort of investment that has taken place over the last few years is now paying off, where the conversion rate on their digital platforms is much higher. But with all of this big push to the digital, there is three major downsides. One is that the number of fake apps have actually been increasing. So these are fake lending apps that will give you a loan, you will get the money in your account, but they do not, since they are unregulated entities, they are very corrosive practices such as bombarding you with text messages when you don't pay your loan on time, or using social media channel to sort of harass you, and you know getting contact with your friends and family so that that harassment can continue. And that's led to a few suicides in the recent months. And though Google has officially pulled some of these apps from their lending store, these apps are very easily can be recreated, replicated, and be go back onto the Play Store again. The other major issue that's come up is that um, there has been system failures increasing across UPI and other payment channels, and this is basically because of old IT systems at the banks. Some of the older banks either don't have the right systems to take on the load, or some of the larger banks which have the investment capabilities are just having too much to deal with on one basis. So, for instance, in June, when the Aadhaar enabled payment system was being used by the government to deliver welfare benefits, the failure rate had doubled to about 60% from around 25 to 30%, which is a standard apparently. And in the case of UPI, the failure rates have doubled overall to about 2 to 3% from about below 1% a year ago. And this is
So Advait, do you
because
think addressing the monopoly of the NPCI is going to help this?
no, Nikhil, I don't think. See, regarding the
Because there
monopoly
is no competition for the NPCI, right now.
correct, but the NPCI only has two commercial products. One is the RuPay card, and the other commercial product is the Bheem app. The Bheem app, if you look at the statistics, does
The
not
Bheem
compete.
app. What? I'm sorry. What is that?
Bheem UPI.
It's
Sorry,
the Bheem app is like what, 1% or less than 1% of UPI transactions.
it's
Probably the
slightly
biggest
higher than
failure in
that. They
terms of
do
an
have
app.
it does have market share, but if
Less
Google
than
Pay and
1%.
Phone Pay dominate at 85%, 86%, then
Yeah.
whatever Bheem UPI gets isn't much. So I don't think the
No, but
NPCI.
Advait, Bheem has basically been below 10% or below 15% for the last
Sure,
2 years now. So
sure,
colossal
sure.
failure for sure. But yeah, you were
So,
talking about the
which is my
NPCI.
point that the NPCI, if you were to run Beam UPI as a commercial arm, it cannot compete with the private sector, right? The private sector has grown over the last 3 years because of cashbacks, because of partnerships,
No,
which are very
I was
commercial
mostly
based.
talking about the competition that NPCI has as a systems operator, right? That we don't have,
Right.
like I remember
No,
the Vatal committee
correct.
report very clearly talked about number one, setting up of a payments regulatory board, which I don't think we are going to see because they moved towards a self-regulation pitch. So that was the RBI's slate of hand to basically move that conversation away from having a proper regulator for payments in the country. We're not also not going to see. We might. I mean, we need. It talked about NPCI expanding its shareholding, which it did
Yes.
finally. But it also talked about designating NPCI as a critical payments infrastructure and also ensuring that there is more competition for critical payment infrastructure companies. So
Correct.
I guess what I was asking you about was, do you think that the NUE model is going to pose significant competition to the NPCI? Do you think NUEs are going to succeed?
Uh,
When are we going to see NUEs in the first place?
so as far as what we know today, there is only one official company that has been set up to apply for the NUE, which is Soham Bharat Digital, which is run by Naveen Surya, who's a member of the Payments Council of India, and Vishwas Patel, who is the head of Infibeam Avenues, another major payment company that exists already. So this is the only company we know that is going to apply for the
So these
NUE
are
license.
these are the two of the smartest minds in payments. I mean, Naveen Surya was
Yeah, they've been
the
around
CEO
for decades.
for decades.
Right?
Naveen Surya was the CEO of It's Cash, which basically was the first wallet in India,
Yeah, yeah.
created to enable initially play win gaming, the lottery system.
Yeah, and Infibeam
Uh,
Avenues is one of the oldest domestic
no. Before
payments
Infibeam
gateways.
Avenues was CC Avenues, which was
Correct.
India's largest payments gateway before PayU came and
So,
disrupted the market.
so Infibeam is
And
the holding company of CC Avenue and all
CC
those.
Avenues was acquired or merged with Infibeam, which
Right.
was which was a e-commerce company started by Vishal, I've forgotten his last name, out of Ahmedabad, and eventually became more like a Shopify for India. So they essentially merged
So,
Infibeam Avenues. So there is history there, but
so,
yeah,
so to
Vishwas
answer your question,
and
I
Naveen are.
don't
Hmm.
see the RBI guidelines for the new umbrella entity for retail payments
Hmm.
clearly says that whatever system the new umbrella entity builds, if it is on similar lines to a UPI, it has to be interoperable with UPI, which is owned by the NPCI.
So
So
therefore,
if
you
I
might
create,
have. So you basically have additional infrastructure for running UPI, then, right? Is that what it's going to be?
sure, you could either have additional infrastructure for running UPI, or you can have a UPI, a second version of UPI, which is built on the same protocols but has a different channel. So, for instance, today your UPI goes from your bank to the NPCI switch to your bank, and then the third-party apps on either end. If somehow the new umbrella entity could re-architecture this chain, redesign this chain,
To have an alternate switch.
right, you have an alternate switch. So you'd
Okay.
have two switches for a real-time payments instrument that works on the model of email ID sort of connection instead of the bank account detail, entering bank account, IFSC code, all of those things. Yeah, so that's one advantage to the NPCI is that whatever new product that comes out from the NUE, will it really outcompete the UPI or let's say Bharat bill payment system, which the NPCI has now made into a separate entity so that it can have its own commercial journey going forward. Uh, this is These are all questions we need to ask because at least so far for now, we do not know what the new umbrella entity is going to do. We do not know what Soham is working on specifically.
So,
Now,
Advait,
however,
go on.
sorry, this
Sorry.
last point, the point that I think NPCI has had advantage all of these years because it is a monopoly. It is the only retail payment system operator today licensed by the RBI. So, and today when you look at the NPCI, when it's clocking at around 60 lakh crore worth of transactions on a yearly basis across all 12 platforms from RuPay to Bharat Bill payments, Aadhaar enabled payments, UPI, and then you pose it to a new startup entity, NPCI is always going to maintain this lead. And now with NPCI setting up one new entity for Bharat Bill payments, which is still relative, which is only 1/10 the size of UPI. But if it's given its own commercial arm and given its own independent board and management, maybe you could see the same sort of growth for Bharat Bill payments going forward. But NPCI now has NPCI International Payments, which means that they're going to export this technology abroad. What the new umbrella entities got to do is a 5-10 year journey to even get to where to get to 63 lakh crore transactions a year, and then let alone export any ideas beyond. So I think the question is, does NPCI need a competitor to grow the digital payments pie in India, which is arguably maybe less than 15% of this population at this point? But if you have to grow the digital payments pie, do you have to think alternatively from a bank-led mobile-based model? So I think that's what would be interesting to see is the solutions that come out, because the NPCI's model has always been banked on the basis of the banking system. Can the NUEs, whether there are 2 or 3 of them get licensed, are they going to look at another model away from a banking system that's payments? That doesn't rely on the existing infrastructure of the banks, because all that would do is just overlay another system on top of existing systems, and essentially all the responsibility for growing the payment system will go back to the banks, right? Or you get the same third party apps to Ashutosh.
Okay, so Advait, we have a request from someone on YouTube who wants us to talk about cryptocurrencies. Now,
Sure.
last year we had a discussion introducing cryptocurrencies. I sure as hell didn't understand how they work, and there was quite a bit of consternation on the policy side with the Supreme Court looking into that case. This year was big for cryptocurrencies in the sense, right? The RBI order was overturned. But tell me, what are your views on what's happening there? What can happen there?
The good thing for the crypto again, like I said at the start, 2020 is the year for fintechs, and 2020 is the year for cryptocurrency enthusiasts. Because on the one hand, Bitcoin is now last week it reached $23,000 per Bitcoin, which is its historical high. And this is on the back of not only people getting into cryptocurrency investing because the price is rising, so I might as well get on board right now and make some money, but also that equity markets took a big hit this year when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I mean, once the world acknowledged that there was a pandemic going on in March, the US stock markets took a hit of 30%, Indian stock markets took a hit of 30%. So I think for some people it was just a switch the assets. I will start investing in cryptocurrencies and putting all my eggs in one basket. And the third major reason why the price is rising is because corporate America has finally woken up and they have taken a U-turn from their earlier position, which is that cryptocurrencies are speculative and risky. Corporate America is now buying a lot of cryptocurrencies as well.
So was Facebook right all along with what was earlier called Libra?
I'm not sure. I mean, Libra is now rebranded. Some of their sponsors, earlier sponsors, have now run away. Visa and Mastercard are tying up with crypto exchanges. So, what is the efficacy of Libra? I'm not sure anymore.
China has also released its own cryptocurrency this year, or something on that sort, right? Something happened.
Correct.
I don't quite remember what.
So there's two parts, right? One, at least on the India front, the March 2nd order from the Supreme Court basically said that the RBI circular back in April 2018 was disproportionate to what was happening, that they shouldn't have taken such a drastic step. They could have taken another step. So after that, there has been no government direction whatsoever about cryptocurrencies. Either from the
But I do
RBI,
remember there was this draft bill that was circulating about a year
that
ago.
was last year prior to the that was from a
before the
expert
hearing
committee under former finance secretary Subhash Chandra Garg, which had recommended criminal provisions to be included for anyone trading or handling.
But that never became public, right?
Never became. So the draft
it was
bill
leaked, but not
never
public.
went. Yeah, it never went. I don't think it was ever introduced into Parliament. There was another report that I had done earlier, which said that there was a cabinet note that was floating around that either reintroduce this bill or introduce a new bill with contours of banning cryptocurrencies, but even that hasn't come out. There hasn't been any change on that front.
So what do you expect next year in crypto?
So this could be because of two reasons, right? One is that the government itself, which is a view I've held for a long time, is the government really does not know what to do with cryptocurrencies, right? Do you make it an asset? Should it come under the markets regulator? Should it come under Reserve Bank of India? These are institutional questions that the government, I don't think, can answer today.
That old question of is crypto an asset or is it
a currency,
a commodity or a currency, right?
Correct. Yeah. So Nikhil, internationally, each regulator has taken a different view. So in the US, the Securities and Exchange Commission handles everything, which is their equivalent of SEBI. In Singapore, it's Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is the equivalent to RBI, the monetary central bank. So someone has to take the responsibility for governing this entire system. I don't think there is an FSDC body, which is the inter-regulatory body. I think someone would need to have to make the regulation decision on either you take it or I take it, or how do we rope in income tax to it? How does CBDT get into it? How does ED get into it because of PMLA violations? There's all these contours need to be figured out, and I don't think anyone's figured it out. I think the bill was the simplest way to say ban it, criminalize it. But now if you have to regulate it, there are 100 questions that need to be answered, especially in terms of jurisdiction. As far as the
Well,
industry
sorry,
is
just
concerned,
to add to that, I just thought of something. The problem for the Indian government is that it is extremely enamored with new technologies. That's why all your papers talk about AI. That's why facial recognition. That's why so much activity around drones. So, you know, India doesn't want to miss out on the next revolution in technology. It doesn't want to be a laggard. It doesn't want to have regulatory roadblocks. And that's a great thing. Which is why I guess they're undecided about crypto because they don't want to miss out on the crypto revolution either.
so the NITI or even the Ministry of IT or even Ministry of Finance or the insurance regulator or Reserve Bank of India, they're very happy about, they're very gung ho about blockchain.
Yeah,
But talk about the number one use case for blockchain that actually exists today in the world, which is
it's
cryptocurrencies.
crypto.
It's silent.
Yeah.
So
By the way,
but
just
as far
speaking of blockchain, the TRAI to address SMS spam
yeah,
proposed this idea of having blockchain in order because like I said, on the internet attribution is extremely difficult. How do you know? How can you prove that someone sent you that spam, right? And that still hasn't been rolled out, and which is why we still have a lot of spam. It's very difficult to roll out blockchain at that scale, right?
so the insurance industry, for instance, has been working on a blockchain project for about 2 years now, and it's gone nowhere.
Hmm.
Or at least it's not being rolled out because you're constantly having to rethink things, especially now in light of the national health mission, digital health mission. Maybe that blockchain has to be tinkered with. But as far as I remember, the biggest problem with that project was that you need to have enough data flowing through the system for it to make cost sense.
Hmm.
From a cost standpoint, if I'm going to invest so much in blockchain technology across every health insurance company, you would need a node and you would be passing policies through that so that you check mis-selling, you check there's no frauds happening and whatnot. If you have to have that, you need X amount of digital health records to be flowing through that entire blockchain. That wasn't available, so therefore the running a blockchain becomes, it's not cost effective. But as far as the Indian cryptocurrency industry is concerned, I think it's doing very well because it's operating in an unregulated space. And
Hmm.
a lot of them have picked up some funding from international investors. Some of the large PE firms and VC firms have invested in Indian companies. Some of the large cryptocurrencies firms have bought stakes in Indian cryptocurrency firms. And we recently reported that the daily trading volume across, let's say, the top four cryptocurrency Indian exchanges has grown by 5 times, from about $4 million in March to about $22 million a day as of December. So clearly, there's a growth in the user base. People are trading it a lot more, especially Bitcoin. But the question is, what if the RBI comes out with another circular that says, stop all this business, or now you have to bring in these checks, those checks.
Hmm.
Does it damage the industry, or does the industry have a transition plan to a regulated state? So I know internally within the industry, they're working on a SRO model, and they're coming out with internal guidelines for each exchange to work on, which satisfies anti-money laundering and know your customer norms. So a lot of them, if you want to sign up to a cryptocurrency exchange, you'll have to give your KYC information. Uh, but how robust is that? Uh, will the regulators want a higher burden of proof for KYC than what is currently being realized? What is the IT department's take on all of this? Will be important to know, because I can say that I'm owning a Bitcoin as an asset for the long term. Do I get charged LTCG or do I get charged short-term capital gains? These are all questions I think investors would have to ask themselves. Like, if you're holding on to them, what
So,
happens to your money?
so Soumya, if I may, I think we should probably do a show called uh, uh, "This Week in Payments" with Advait.
I think we should, and that's a great idea, given just how much is uncertain and just how much is happening here. I
Yeah.
think that
So
it
I
calls
have,
for a
I
show.
have one more topic to talk about, but I'll leave it to that.
go on.
Yeah,
Listen,
go on, go on.
you're actually. I haven't seen a Bhayanak Moth T-shirt in a very long time, so you have that leverage. Go ahead.
Okay, last one is what's going to happen to all the lending companies. So last year, the government consolidated 10 public sector banks into 4. These were on the basis of regional strength and IT network. So whoever had common branches in the certain, whether north, south, east, west, and whoever on the same IT system were consolidated. Thereafter, so that consolidation effectively took place on April 1st this year. And thereafter, the government had said that they are going to look at consolidating the cooperative banks. Uh, the reason why I'm saying this is significant is because now cooperative banks don't have IT strength like the public sector banks did or whatnot. But I think the three things that have happened from a technology front that makes this possible. One is SBI, State Bank of India, deciding to hive off its flagship app called Yono to a separate entity, and this will be a banking as a service entity. So anyone can use the Yono app architecture to plug in their own bank. So for a consolidated cooperative bank sector, you get a front end app ready made for your customers, which can be integrated. SBI has done all the work. You just have to pay SBI fee for doing so. The second is OCEN, the Open Credit Enabled Network. What this would mean is that the cooperative banks or any lender, for instance, does not need to invest heavily in their own underwriting teams. They can just pass on any loan, uh, potential loanee or a loan customer, potential borrower. Any one of those cases can be forwarded to 100 different lenders. So a cooperative bank can continue working in the region that it does. It'll have a front end app on the from Yono. It'll have a lending product based on the Oken system, which any lender at the back end, whether SBI wants to take the risk, ICICI Bank wants to take the risk, or let's say an NBFC at the back end wants to take the risk, they can do that. And the third is Kashi, which is cash over internet, which the government, uh, at least it's in ideation stage still. I know there's a committee that has been set up to headed by the Niti Ayog to launch this. Kashi is essentially for microcredit. It would be a new, like a credit rail, like a payments rail for microcredit. So I think Yono, Oken, and Kashi will help consolidate your banking system and banking sector, because a lot of decision making will now just be automated on these platforms, and the decision will be taken by the banks with better underwriting models and the capacity to lend, as opposed to the small banks that don't have the staff or don't have the capabilities to underwrite risky loans or whatnot. Yeah, that's
Okay, so we'll just go on to end. Predictions from everyone. What are the things that you think are going to happen next year? Arun.
I think the biggest one is obviously auctions for telecom. I think that's going to be very interesting to see how that.
Are we getting 5G spectrum?
We are not, but whoever gets the spectrum, the next round of spectrum, because we haven't had an auction in years, they are going to have a huge advantage in terms of quality of service, and that is something that the telcos have really not.
Okay, very quickly. Number two.
Number two is probably we will see the end of the online content regulation discussions. This year we had the allocation of business rules, which clearly say that the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting gets authority over films and TV shows streamed online. I think we will see what that leads to next year. We have already been going slowly with the back and forth of the government refusing to endorse the self-regulation code.
Okay, sorry Arun, very quickly, I'm going to cut you off, right? So Soumya, what are your next two?
So definitely the draft drone rules were notified this year. So I'm expecting those rules to be formalized and notified next year. Remote drone deliveries, I think will kind of be in the discussion. And of course, the second point, facial recognition everywhere. Anywhere around you see streets, cameras everywhere. Maybe like we'll just see like an exponential growth in the deployment of facial recognition software. So I think those are my two predictions.
So therefore, not only for health reasons, wear a mask.
Exactly.
All right, Aditya.
Yeah, so I think platform regulation, the debate around it will become a lot more intense, and it might even become intense to the point of it seeming imminent at some point of time. So that's one. The second, I think because of all this discussion around one nation, one election, I think there is going to be some sort of a push for Aadhaar to be, to be an integral part of the voting system. We might even see some remote voting instances happen somewhere in the country. So yeah, that's that.
Okay, Advait.
First, major consolidation and acquisitions in the fintech space, whether it's on payments or lending. On the lending side, there's going to be high defaults for fintech players from January onwards. Once the moratorium, once the classification on moratorium defaults is lifted by the Supreme Court. The second would be cryptocurrency regulations. I'm sure the RBI will either come out with guidelines for it, or the government will issue a new directive or a new law. And the third, I think, which is a topic we haven't touched upon, is the news media regulations. How that would put people who are independent journalists on the same footing as someone who works at the big mainstream media outlets, and how does that affect people? How does that affect funding for new media startups as opposed to the big legacy media houses? How they can continue raising money, but the new media startups suffer? And just generally how uh, social media is used for spurring fake news. I think that we'll see a new dimension onwards as you've seen this year.
So there will be regulations for intermediary liability finally finalized once the pandemic is over. Okay, Trisha.
Well, I think there'll be another sea change in gambling. Perhaps it would be permitted by more and more states. Perhaps it will be harmonized throughout the country. And
In fact, Trisha,
just
centralized legislation on that would overrule state specific legislation, perhaps. Because I
yeah,
remember Shashi
possibly.
Tharoor had put a private member's bill for legalizing of online gaming and betting.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and the process already started. And we might need some kind of like health ID slash Aadhaar for to get a vaccine. Given if we assume that the vaccine is coming, and this is not just tech policy; it's personal. We will all have to
Yeah.
get it.
Okay. And anything else that you think will happen?
Mm. Oh, by the way, the we didn't speak about this, but depending on how it's executed, the gig economy stuff, and whether or not it will be actually be beneficial for delivery workers will be interesting to see.
Hmm.
And it's interesting. Somebody reported, Inc42 reported on this. Zomato has already started experimenting with a new model of working with delivery boys where it's not based on daily logins and
Hmm.
certain number of hours, and they've tweaked it a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see why they're doing this and what will that mean for them having to give benefits to all these workers. So yeah, that'll be interesting to track how
Okay.
whether
Hmm.
it will benefit the delivery guys. I think is very important to look at.
Okay, so my list to end this is number one. There will be, I think, education and health will get the payments treatment. So health first, where the health ID, that entire UPI like system will get set up, is getting set up with the Swasth Alliance for Health. So that is probably going to get rolled out with a mix of the health ID, Arogya Setu, etc., and the Swasth Alliance, which is kind of like um, uh, it's similar to an NPCI kind of a model. Um, Second, I think we're going to begin the process of amending the IT Act. Third, we might actually see a report on non-personal data finalized, and perhaps the process of creating a non-personal data bill perhaps getting started, where we will hopefully see the finalization of the personal data protection bill. With what Trisha spoke about with the gig economy workers, we're probably going to see the digitization of social security for gig economy workers, with those databases getting created. I expect more challenges around digital sovereignty and tech nationalism, and there will be a push, a more significant a push for data localization. Um, I don't know whether Advait agrees with me on this or not, but I think we'll see the rollout of the public credit registry either next year or the year after. We will probably also, uh, you know, see something happening around fraud and especially all the phishing scams that are going on. So there would be some consumer protection moves taking place to address uh, 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 payments fraud. I think we're going to see competition regulation come in. The Google case at the CCI is very, very significant. We might actually see the final, the like, if the PDP bill passes, we might see some rules to legalize facial recognition. Um, and lastly, um, if there has been a very strong push on end-to-end encryption, and my sense is if end-to-end encryption falls, if the government is is able to ban end-to-end encryption in India, VPNs are going to be next. And that's, of course, aside of any kind of content regulation and platform regulatory rules that come into place. So that's it from all of us here at MediaNama. Thank you all for your support, for reading, for commenting, for sharing your thoughts with us through the year. Please do tell us how we can do better. We've just relaunched our site after a couple of days of pain, but I hope you like the new site. We will be rolling out a subscription model next year, so please do sign up for that as well. Uh, Thanks everyone. Have a great 2021. I hope it's